On June 6, 1967, the Blann family, Jack, Levon, Betty, Mary, and Paul, along with Aunt Fleecy, left JFK Airport in New York for a 3-week trip to Europe. The flight over was uneventful. We slept most of the way. We landed first in Shannon, Ireland, and then took another plane to Dublin. Our first sight in Dublin is Trinity College, an imposing set of buildings in downtown Dublin. We stayed at Jury's Hotel, also in downtown Dublin. This is the Bank of Ireland. Actually, it's the old Parliament House, but now it serves as the bank. These are scenes in downtown Dublin. Downtown Dublin. We were so sleepy the first day we could hardly enjoy the city. The arch is going into St. Stephen's Park. This is actually the Catholic library. It looks like a church. The tour company sent a car out to take us around the town the next day. This is the Dublin arena where the annual famous Dublin Horse Show is held. This is the Irish White House where the president lives. It's in Phoenix Park. This is Phoenix Park, one of the largest parks in Europe. We took a tour of the suburbs and out along the coast, looking out on one of the islands in Dublin Bay. This goes on out into the Irish Sea, the sea that separates Ireland from England. The Wicklow Mountains are off in the distance. Crossing the bridge over the River Liffey. It runs through the center of Dublin. And now we move on to London, flying from Dublin to London, and our first stop, very near our hotel, is Buckingham Palace. We'll come back tomorrow to watch the changing of the guard. Now here at St. James Palace, where the Queen Mother traditionally lives, we do see the changing of the guards in the afternoon. And now in the center of the city at Piccadilly Circle, or Circus as it's usually called. Looking down at the old Windmill Theater, the famous old Windmill Theater. Westminster Abbey, and the Parliament with Big Ben. The statue of Abraham Lincoln that's there in the Westminster Square. We're going to cross Westminster Bridge now and go over to the Lambeth side of the Thames River. Over there is Lambeth section of London. And now we look back from the Lambeth side to Big Ben and the Houses of Parliament. The River Thames is full of river traffic. Looking here, we see some of the old ruins from World War II where the bombers struck. That's New Scotland Yard over there, those buildings, but of course Scotland Yard had already moved from there in '67. Big Ben is striking the hour. That's the cenotaph memorial to World War I. And here's the Queen's Lifeguard Station here, where they're quartered and where their stables are. This is the parade ground on the other side of the building where the lifeguards stay. That's some of the areas where the protection for World War II. Now we go down toward Buckingham Palace and look back at the Admiralty building there in Whitehall District, they call it. Look at the flowers in St. James Park as we move on back across. Look back at some of the other government buildings. Down at the end, we see the monument to Queen Victoria and the and Buckingham Palace. We're moving down the mall toward Buckingham Palace now. Still St. James Park. This was June, so the flowers were beautiful. This is the monument in front of Buckingham Palace with the palace in the background. Now we see the lifeguards coming by, getting ready for the changing of the guards at Buckingham Palace. Now we'll watch the changing of the guards, which happens every day at about 11 o'clock in front of Buckingham Palace. These are the Coldstream Guards, the band of the Coldstream Guards that are marching in now. Now the guards have been posted. Now we go back into downtown London, looking for Carnaby Street. And now we found Carnaby Street. Just a little street about 1 block long. This is when the Carnaby Street fashions were so popular. Dresses were short Carnaby Street then, but they hadn't gotten short in America at that time. We stopped in the shops and bought clothes for the kids. Now back to Piccadilly Circus. The statue of Eros in the center. It was still in the center of Piccadilly Circus in 1967. It later was moved out of the center. And now we go to the railroad station and take the train and have dinner on the train and head from Liverpool Street Station out to Harwich. And we get on this ferry, overnight ferry, so we have a cabin, and head from Harwich to the Hook of Holland. Paul's walking the decks. Here we are deboating at the Hook of Holland. Now we cross the Dutch countryside, see our first windmill. Stop for some pictures. The first large city we come to is The Hague, and this is the Peace Palace at The Hague. Now we enter Amsterdam and cross some of the canals in Amsterdam. This is the government building in the center of town. Now we visit the Anne Frank house. At that time, it was very much in the same stage as Anne Frank had left it. Today, though, it's been turned into a museum and doesn't really resemble much of its old self. That's the bookcase behind which the stair was as you entered the house. That's the Anne Frank house from the outside. And now we cross the flat countryside, flat Dutch countryside, and head for Germany. Now we go through the customs at the border of Germany. Now we're crossing Germany, heading for Cologne. This is the Rhine River at Cologne. And that's the famous Cologne Cathedral in the background. During the war, I was about 20 miles from there watching our bombers bomb Cologne with the great cathedral standing up into the sky and bombs falling all around it. But amazingly, the bombing didn't do a great deal of damage, and it's been completely restored. At least it didn't do a great deal of damage to the cathedral. A great Gothic cathedral. Now we go down to Blann, where we spend the night, this little hotel. Blann was the birthplace of Beethoven. At that time, it was also the seat of the West German government. There's our hotel again with the bar underneath. Now we go down the Rhine. The famous hills along the Rhine. With a castle on top of nearly every mountain. In the distance we'll see the abutments at the Remagen, where the Remagen Bridge used to stand. You can see them on each side, and the big hill to the left where the railroad tunnel entered. That's Remagen, the bridge that the Ludendorff Bridge stood there and was destroyed during the war, and that was where the first crossing of the Rhine took place by the Allied armies. Now we enter the city of Koblenz, one of the great Rhine cities where the Moselle and the Rhine come together. Or the Mosel, I think the Germans call it, the French call it the Moselle. Still some old wartime ruins. Another one of the Rhine castles. We take the ferry down the Rhine, but I don't have any pictures of the ferry. And we go near Stuttgart and eventually are in Munich, one of the palaces in the park in Munich. And we have lunch at the Ratskeller underneath the Rathaus. The Rathaus is the city hall. This is the square in front of the Rathaus, and they were having a celebration of some soccer victory. And the famous Glockenspiel is here on the front of the building, but we weren't there when it was striking. Glockenspiel is just there in that little alcove. The figures move and dance at 11 o'clock every morning when it strikes. One of the famous old churches, Munich. Munich was almost completely destroyed during the war. The churches were still left, but almost all the other buildings were destroyed. I used to visit it and work there some right after the war, and there was nothing but ruins. It's amazing how it's been restored to look just like it did before the war. And now we head south to the Bavarian Alps, and we come first to the little town of Oberammergau, famous for the Passion Play, and also famous for the wood carvers. This is the place where the Passion Play is held every year, or every 10 years, that is. Many tourists come from all over Germany to Oberammergau, even when there's no Passion Play. Of course, there was no Passion Play in 1967. Passion Plays are only held every 10 years, on the even 10th year. Now we go to Garmisch, Partenkirchen, and we'll go through the Mittenwald Pass to Austria. In Mittenwald, we stopped for a little while at a shop. Mittenwald is famous for its fiddles, and here Paul bought a Tyrolean hat that he wore for the rest of the trip, and you'll see it in the pictures from now on. It got very snowy and dark as we crossed the pass into Austria. Now we're coming across the Enns River out down into Innsbruck. Innsbruck in German means Enns Bridge, or the bridge over the Enns. Some Tyrolean hats. Now we're in downtown Innsbruck. Maria Teresa Street. Innsbruck is a beautiful city with the mountains hanging over it. Our hotel was right in the center of town. This is a little church on the outskirts of Innsbruck. Beautiful interior. We leave Innsbruck now and head toward the Brenner Pass, which will take us from Austria into Italy. We move now into the Italian Dolomites, beautiful part of the Alps. It began to snow on us up in the Dolomites. We come now to Cortina d'Ampezzo, which is the major city of the Dolomite, and it's the place where the Winter Olympics was held at one time. We leave Cortina and go through the mountains towards Venice. There's some of the Olympics ski jumps. river valley, we saw that the tremendous destruction that had been done by a dam that broke up in the mountains and killed many people and destroyed everything along the valley. All along the riverbed. And there up in that valley there was where the dam was. We leave the mountains and come down to the flatland and approach Venice. You can't take the bus or automobile into Venice, so we'll have to park the bus and take the boat down the Grand Canal into Venice itself. Now we're on the Grand Canal, heading towards our hotel. We're in a powerboat, sort of a ferry rather than a gondola. We did ride a gondola later on. Beautiful city of Venice, one of the most unusual cities in the world. This is a Murano glass factory where the Murano glass is produced, or at least this was a sales room for the Murano glass factory. We saw them blowing glass here. You walk everywhere in Venice. There's no automobiles. Either that or you take a boat. Now this is the St. Mark's Cathedral with the Doge's Palace, and right in front of it is a campanile. This is the campanile, or the bell tower. That's the entrance to St. Mark's Cathedral. It was built in about 900 AD to house the body of St. Mark. I don't know whether the St. Mark is buried there or not. This is St. Mark's Square, or the Plaza San Marco. The Doge's Palace and St. Mark's Cathedral are all more or less the same building. They adjoin each other. Across the way we see the island of San Giorgio and San Giorgio Maggiore Church. Then off the another island of Della Giudecca. This is inside the Doge's Palace. There's a beautiful art museum inside the palace. A view from one of the windows of the palace. This is the floor. Beautiful tile on the floor, three-dimensional looking tile. This is the Grand Canal we're looking across here. One of the widest parts of it as it comes down to the foot of San Marcos Plaza San Marcos. Back in the square again. Now we're on one of the boats. You can see how the men propel them. That's part of our party on the gondola behind us. And that, I think, is the Rialto Bridge up ahead. The Grand Canal is lined with beautiful big homes or palaces, as they're called. Even the fire engines are on boats. Now we're leaving Venice and going back toward Florence. We pass through Padua and Bologna and arrive at eventually in Florence. We're never very far from an Esso station. We travel across the middle of Italy going to Florence. Florence is an inland city. Now we're in Florence. These are the doors of the baptistry, which Michelangelo called the doors of paradise. Each of the doors is decorated with these carvings, which we were told were meant to illustrate the Bible to the people in those days. They didn't have movies or anything, so They illustrated them with pictures of this type. We move now to the Cathedral of Florence. Beautiful old cathedral. You don't see the great dome much here. This is the front of it. Has a great red dome that's seen from miles. Some of the windows are seen from inside. This is the campanile of Giotto. It adorns the cathedral. We go now through the center of Florence, and we'll cross the Arno River and go over to the Piazzale Michelangelo, where we have a gorgeous view of the Queen City of Tuscany. You can see in the distance there the tower of the Palazzo Vecchio, and there's the great Cathedral of Florence. Now we can see the Ponte Vecchio, the old bridge here. This old bridge was started in the 10th century. It has gold and silver shops along each side of it, part of the old wall. This is a statue of David that is here in this Piazzale, but the great statue of David by Michelangelo is in the Academy. Now here we are in the gallery of the Academy, and you can see Michelangelo's great work, the sculpture of David. This was done when he was 25 years old. We move through the streets of Florence and head out across Tuscany toward Rome, where we'll spend the night. The old villages of Tuscany appear on the hills on each side of the freeway. The autopista, I think they call it in Italy. An old aqueduct in the distance. And now we enter Rome. We go straight to our hotel and then take a illuminated tour of the city. And then the next morning we're at the Sistine Chapel to go view Michelangelo's great paintings on the ceiling. We don't have any pictures of that, of course, because they don't allow photographs in the Sistine Chapel. This is a picture of St. Peter's and then the square in front of St. Peter's. This is in the Vatican. The great dome of St. Peter's, I think it's the greatest dome in the world. We're still in the area around the Vatican. These are the Swiss guards that guard St. Peter's and the Vatican. It's traditional to have Swiss guards to guard the Vatican. We're inside the dome of St. Peter's now. The light doesn't let us see too much of the detail, but you can get a little bit of the idea of the immenseness of the great dome of St. Peter's. We leave St. Peter's. We're at a hotel now. Our hotel was out in the residential area. It was a very nice little hotel. The name was the Park Hotel. Looking out of the windows of the hotel, we see the residential area around it. We're moving through downtown Rome. This used to be the Victor Emmanuel Memorial, but they've got a different name for it now. This is the Pantheon. It was designed by Hadrian, the same man that built the wall between England and Scotland. The Pantheon is now a Roman Catholic church. And they have services inside of it. So it's an instance where they've taken a pagan building and made a religious building out of it. The big hole in the ceiling where they used to let the smoke out and the light in, to warm it, they had big fires in the middle of it in the Roman days. Now, this is the Roman Forum. This was the center of old Rome. It's all ruins now, but they're still excavating, finding new things. Now we move to the Colosseum and get a view of what's left of the old Colosseum of Rome. The Colosseum is right in the middle of downtown Rome, so you go past it almost any time you go anywhere in Rome. By this time, Bill Baldwin has joined our party, and you'll see a lot of him in the pictures from now on. As I said, we go by the Colosseum almost every direction in and out of Rome. We're going now out the Appian Way to the catacombs. Not much that you can take a picture of at the catacombs. But the historic Appian Way hasn't changed much in 2,000 years. One of the original Roman roads. Now we go to Tivoli and to the gardens of the Villa d'Este, where the wonderful fountains are located. But we go at night, and they're beautiful at night with the lights, but they don't show up too well in the photographs. These are all natural flowing fountains. They're what you call artesian fountains. The water comes down through springs. We leave Rome, stop for lunch, and move on to Milan. Milan is a great industrial city in northern Italy. This is a great cathedral there in Milan, but it's late in the evening and the pictures don't show up very well. Very unique design for this cathedral. This is the great square there by the cathedral, and then on one side is the Galleria. This is the entrance to the Galleria. This is the original Galleria, you might say. It's looking through the Galleria, shops along each side. And this is La Scala Opera House, which is on the same square. Or I guess you call it a plaza. Beneath that statue that you see there was where Mussolini and his mistress's bodies were placed after they were killed during the war. This square was very famous there for a little while at the end of the war because the partisans killed Mussolini and put his body there. We leave Milan and head north toward Como, beautiful Lake Como. This is almost on the Italian-Swiss border. We cross into Switzerland, pass through immigration. We're going to go up and head towards the St. Gothard Pass. We stop along the lake shore and have some refreshments. St. Gothard's Pass had only been open a day or two, and we were some of the first people to cross through it. If you go before it opens in the summer, then you have to go through a long tunnel. Our guide was very pleased that we were going to go across the pass rather than through the tunnel. So we got to see a lot of hairpin curves and a lot of snow on each side of the road. Always the Swiss brown cows in the fields. We get higher and higher in the mountains and closer to the snow. The policeman led each convoy of cars through the pass. Really going down through canyons of snow. Now we're at the crest of St. Gothard's Pass and starting down the other side. Now the road is one way, as you can see. We stop in this little Swiss town for lunch. We see the people walking out on the hills and the cows grazing. You can hear the cowbells ringing in the distance. The great bells that all the Swiss cows have on them can be heard for miles. Now we continue our trip, start coming down out of the mountains. This is the town where William Tell is supposed to have shot the apple off his son's head. Now we reach Lake Lucerne and move into Lucerne. We pass the little church that commemorates the place where the Queen of Belgium was killed back in 1930s. We go to our hotel, the Blann in Bellevue. Get our first look at one of the old wooden bridges across Lake Lucerne. Another one of their wooden bridges. This area around our hotel. The brass bands are here serenading. They're having a convention and they're serenading the people around the hotel. There's a beautiful view in almost every direction from the hotel. Lucerne is a beautiful, quaint city. This is the entrance to one of the old wooden bridges. They're hundreds and hundreds of years old. The river that runs underneath is flowing quite rapidly. Some of the paintings that are on the arches under the bridge. We got up early on Sunday morning and there's no one on the streets. Shops aren't open yet. We're heading out of Lucerne to go to the mountain resort of Engelberg, and we're going to go up on the top of Engelberg. The views get more and more majestic as we go up the hills toward our destination. Now we're going to take the cable railway and cable cars up to the top of the mountain from here. Those are the kind of cars we're going to ride in up to the top of the mountain. Now we're at the peak. This is a ski resort. Has snow the year round. We got to spend a few hours at the crest, and the kids have a great time in the snow, playing in the snow. Mary looks like she's getting ready to make a snowball. Oh, now we're having fun just sliding on the snow. Oh, now we've got some snowballs. Everybody gets in the snowball throwing. Paul's got his Tyrolean hat on. All good things have to come to an end, and now we've got to go back to Lucerne. However, it's still fairly early in the day. This is the Balances in Bellevue Hotel from the lakeside. We're going to take a tour of the lake. It's in the late afternoon. Boat tour of the lake. We stop in one of the little towns along the lake, and we're back on the boat again. The old camera broke right here, and we don't have any more pictures until we get to Paris. Now we're in Paris. It's a view of the Seine, and now we're looking at the Concierge, one of the most historic buildings in Paris, and that's the oldest clock in Paris. It's the first clock. The Palace of Justice. And now we're inside the Notre Dame Cathedral, looking at the rose windows.
This is the back of Notre Dame Cathedral. Now we see the full view, but from the rear. It's difficult to get a picture from the front, the traditional view. This is looking across the Seine at Notre Dame. Now these are some of the little art dealers' shops along the Seine. Looking at the Seine again. Driving through the streets of Paris. This was our hotel. That's the Trocadero, which is across the Seine from the Eiffel Tower. That's the École Militaire, where there's the military school of France. And here we are at the bottom, and that's Betty with Bill Baldwin. We're at the bottom of the Eiffel Tower. You don't realize the immense size of that thing until you get there. Looking down underneath the legs. I think we're looking towards the Trocadero there. We're on the, and now this is Les Invalides, where the place where Napoleon and his marshals are buried. There's a place where you stand in the gallery and look down on the tomb of Napoleon. It's very impressive. This is the tomb of one of Napoleon's marshals, which is in one of the galleries. And now, this is the tomb of Napoleon, the one that seen so often. Going by the École Militaire again, of the military school. And now we're in the Place Concorde, Place de la Concorde. That's the Egyptian obelisk in the center. It's right in the center of town, and off one side there is the museum. The Louvre Museum is down a ways across the Tuileries. The museum was closed the day we were in Paris on this trip, so we didn't get to go inside. This is one of the ends of the Louvre. View looking down toward the Louvre. It's the way it looked in '67. It doesn't look that way anymore because it has a pyramid. Now we're at Versailles. And this is the famous Palace of Versailles. And we visited, we joined Giselle Booth here. She was living there in one of the apartments with her little daughter. This is inside the Palace of Versailles, and then we look out one of the windows at the beautiful gardens of Versailles, which are just as impressive as the inside of the palace. That's the famous Hall of Mirrors. Bill Baldwin went with us on this little tour. We were separate from our tour. We took this on our own, and Giselle was escorting us around. And Giselle and her friend. There's another lady with Giselle there in our party. So our party has gotten quite big. Looking out on the grounds of Versailles. Back inside the palace again. This is the palace of Louis XIV. And also the palace of Marie Antoinette. Those palm trees are taken in every winter. That's why they're in boxes. Now we're back in Paris to the Montmartre, and this is the beautiful Sacré-Cœur church there at the top of Montmartre. There's a little funicular that takes you up to the top, and there we're up there at the church. It's a wonderful view of Paris from up here. Now we go down the Rue Clignancourt to find the Morel Bakery, and we found it. And there's Papa Denis and Angèle and Vero and Christine. And here's Leon. The night tour of Paris, and we're at Arc of Triumph. Looking back down the Champs-Élysées. And there is the Egyptian obelisk that we saw in the Place de la Concorde. Now we're heading out of Paris to Calais, where we'll take the ferry over. It's about a 2.5 hour trip across on the ferry back to England. Rice windmill in the countryside, and now we're going past some German fortifications of the old West Wall. We're on our ferry heading towards England. We look back on the docks of Calais as we leave, and off in the distance we can see the white cliffs there at Calais. And in a few minutes we'll be looking at the white cliffs of Dover in front of us. Now these are the white cliffs of Dover coming up in front of us. Dock in Dover, and now we start our second tour of Britain. We take a fast train into London from Dover, and first thing you know, we're back in London. And the next morning, the first place we'll visit is the British Museum. And of course, you always go to see the mummies and the Egyptian artifacts. There are plenty of mummies in the British Museum. This is the Rosetta Stone, the most famous archaeological discovery of all time, because it has 3 languages on it and allowed the hieroglyphics to be translated. There's so much to see in the British Museum, it takes a while to see even part of it. Heading towards St. Paul's Cathedral. Now this is at St. Paul's. These are the steps where well, we don't see the steps yet, but they're there under those, there they are. The steps where the bird woman and Mary Poppins sat and fed the pigeons. Now we're in the great dome of St. Paul's. We were told that a V-1 rocket actually passed through the dome but didn't explode. That's how close it came to being destroyed during the war. When I was there in London, right at the time the war ended, about a month after the war ended, all you could see in this part of London, you looked down and all you saw was St. Paul sitting there and with miles and miles of nothing but rubble around it that had been destroyed during the German bombings. Here are those steps we mentioned again. And that's one of the queens. I don't remember which one. Queen Virginia, somebody like that. Now we cross the Thames and we can see the Tower Bridge off in the distance. I think we're crossing London Bridge. I don't believe it had been taken up and shipped to Arizona yet when we were there in '67. Now we're crossing the Tower Bridge. The industrial area of the Thames. And there's the Tower of London. Traditionally, the beefeaters guard the Tower of London. The crown jewels are here in the tower, and a lot of ancient arms are displayed. Henry VIII's armor and things of that sort. It's noted because of all the people that were executed there. All the wives of Henry VIII were executed here, and part of the old London Wall is, old Roman wall around London is there in the grounds of the tower. So one of the beefeaters explaining the things to see there in the tower. Most of the things you see and the stories you hear in the tower about the tower are kind of gruesome. Now this is the old curiosity shop, made famous in Dickens' story about the old curiosity shop. I think we're inside St. Paul's Cathedral here again. might be Westminster Abbey. I didn't see the outside of it. Yeah, I believe this is Westminster Abbey. This is the place where all the kings and queens of England are crowned. It's the mother church of the Queen of England, or of all of England. Now we go to Baker Street and we look out where supposedly Sherlock Holmes used to live over there. The old home is now we're in the Madame Tussauds waxworks. And we go on to Hampton Court. This is one of the palaces of Henry VIII. Beautiful gardens here around Hampton Court. The palace itself is famous for its old clock, which has all sorts of chronological features on it. It tells you the stages of the moon and sun and everything else. Well, it started to rain. Here's the Thames at Hampton Court. Now we're in Windsor, and this is the Windsor Palace. Getting quite dark in the rain. I think this is the Queen Mary's dollhouse that the guard chewed me out so for taking pictures of it, said I was insulting the Queen. Well, we move on to Stratford-on-the-Avon. Birthplace of Shakespeare here. Thing thing I think that impressed us the most was, again, the beautiful flowers and gardens. With the greengrocers back there. This is Shakespeare's home where it was. Nothing there now but the foundations and garden. Couple of tourists back there in the little seats in the garden. Here's the Avon River, beautiful river. That's the old church where Shakespeare was baptized and he's buried there. That's a hand ferry crossing the Avon River. That's the Shakespeare Theater. It's a beautiful sight looking down the Avon toward the church. They told us the swans belong to the Queen. I think once a year they go around and count them all. Now we go out to Anne Hathaway's house. Anne Hathaway's cottage. Typical English garden around it. Walking back to the railroad station, we decided the bus was going to be too long, so we decided to walk back. And we're getting the train back to London, and now we're on the way to airport to say goodbye to England. And we move on again to Ireland. And we see the green fields of the Emerald Isle. We're going to land again at Shannon, and we see the Bunratty Castle. And that night we went to one of their medieval dinners. But in the afternoon we went to see the old Bunratty village and had scones by the fire in one of the little cottages. Now we're at 6 Mile Creek at the pub, and we had a taste of the Guinness, the black Guinness, and it was pretty bitter. And it's raining again here in Ireland. Back in '67, Ireland was a pretty poor country, and you didn't see much traffic or anything but horse-drawn vehicles. This is a ferry circle. You see a lot of those in Ireland. They're left in the fields. Supposedly they're done by the ferry people. One of the old churches, they told us they tear the roof off the church if it's abandoned so they don't have to pay taxes on it. So this says this is an old Franciscan priory. We go to Ennis and have tea and some Irish whiskey, but they also had dances for us. The school kids danced, but we didn't get any good pictures. There wasn't enough light. And here we go across the River Shannon at Limerick. We drove through the city of Limerick, which is very near Shannon. And now we fly back to JFK Airport in New York, and we end our trip